Hi, welcome to another episode of the Carolyn Glick Show. There's so much going on, and today we're going to be joined by a really important guest, Naomi Kahn from the Regavim organization, to talk about the wholesale destruction of Jewish history and heritage in Judea and Samaria by the Palestinian Authority that are supported by the European Union and God knows who else. We're going to talk about it. But in the meantime, I want to talk to you about the whole issue of judicial reform. Israel right now, I'm taping on Sunday morning, the 22nd of January, 2023, and we are very quickly heading for a train crash. You have the left, led by Supreme Court President Esther Chayut, and opposition leaders Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz, who are driving a train 200 kilometers an hour straight into the government of Israel, and they don't care that they're about to crash the entire country. And, this can happen any number of ways, right? We go back for a second and we remember that Israel's Supreme Court does not have any checks and balances on it, and they have arrogated to themselves the powers of the Knesset and the powers to legislate laws. They've arrogated to themselves the power of the government to administrate the country, to set policies on any subject that they want. They just last week fired Aryeh Deri, the head of the Shas party, from his cabinet positions as Minister of the Interior and Minister of Health, based on the feelings of the justices. You had a 11 justice panel, 10 of whom said that he had to be fired, and they used no law as the basis for their judgment. So this is just, we have gotten to this place, which is impossible. And we don't know how the train crash is going to be manifested in reality. Over the weekend, the Attorney General, who was appointed by Gidon Sa'ar, the former Justice Minister, the former Justice Minister Gidon Sa'ar, who is motivated by hatred and fear of investigations of serious allegations of sexual abuse that he allegedly conducted during his tenure as education minister. So Gidon Sa'ar appointed Gali Miara Baharav to be the Attorney General. And over the weekend, it was reported that she is considering firing Netanyahu based on no law. She's saying that he is in breach of his agreement that he made with a previous attorney general who railroaded him into a criminal indictment, that he isn't allowed to be involved with any legal issues as prime minister. And she said he's breaching this agreement, and therefore she is considering firing him. And if she doesn't fire him, if she gets fired, I hope, then the Supreme Court may decide to fire Netanyahu. Why not? They fired Deri, and they had no legal basis for their judgment. But they could fire Netanyahu too. We don't know. Or perhaps the government is going to pass Justice Minister Yariv Levin's plan for judicial reform, which is very moderate. It involves giving politicians, our elected officials, control over Supreme Court appointments. It involves enabling the Knesset to override Supreme Court judgments that cancel duly promulgated legislation. It gives the government the power to appoint its own legal advisors, because right now those legal advisors are effectively appointed by the Supreme Court, and they're not subordinate to the government, and they don't follow the government's lead. They don't help the government. They try to, as Gali Baharav Miara, who wants to fire the prime minister, is doing, they try to gum up the works and block the government from governing and the Knesset from legislating on behalf of the Supreme Court, which has no checks and balances on it. So, it could be that the government passes Yariv Law's suggested reforms that I went over a couple of shows ago with a member of Knesset, Amit Halevi. You can look at that show or last week's show, where I also went over and summarized them in my lead. Or the government can, the Knesset can pass the laws that Yariv Levin has suggested. And then the Supreme Court can act on a petition from one of the leftist NGOs and cancel all of the reforms and say that all of the laws that were just passed by the Knesset that place checks and balances on their power are illegal and move on from there. Or, we have leftist commentators on television like Channel 13's Raviv Drucker and others who are calling for violence. And, somebody may be shot in the head in the name of democracy. We don't know what's going to happen. Everything is happening very, very, very fast, and it's getting out of hand. I mean, I heard last week as well, the European Union is getting involved with this. They are now telling the universities that if the professors don't come out and support the rebellion against the government that's going on now, that they're not going to fund their laboratories and their other operations. So, we have external actors that are coming in and trying to coerce Israeli institutions to oppose the government's plan to place checks and balances on the judiciary and so restore Israeli democracy. And so we can't back down. We, being we the people who elected the Netanyahu government with its 64 mandates. And by the way, just to be clear, one of the things that the left is saying is that it's practically even. They're practically there's practically a tie between left and right in Israel. That's not true. The right religious bloc got 64 out of 120 mandates in the Knesset. The left got 46, and the Arab parties got the rest. So you have 64 and 46, and that's 110, and then you have 10 mandates for the Arab parties, which are not part of the leftist bloc. So you're not talking at all about a near tie. You're talking about a very clear victory for the right against the left, and the left is trying with its 46 mandates and its total control over the narrative through just the trumpets that they have in the media that are pushing out their messages 24/7, and the legal fraternity, of course, and they're just bombarding the public with this incredibly false narrative. I read Haaretz newspaper over the weekend, just, or some of it, as much as I could stomach, just to kind of know the enemy kind of thing, and I couldn't, even though I bought it, I spent 37 shekels. That's like $10 or more for this trash sheet. I get it, and it's pure poison. All of the articles in them, this is in the Hebrew Haaretz, they're demonizing everybody who is in the government, everybody who supports the government. Supporters of the government aren't referred to as human being. They're trumpets. They're bibistim, Bibi clones or bots. They just completely demonize the majority of Israelis and say that they're evil, that they're stupid, that they've been duped or whatever. But be that as it may, the government cannot back down. They can't back down because this is what they ran on. This is what their voters demand that they do, especially after Derry, who received 400,000 votes, has just been fired on the basis of no law by 10 out of 11 Supreme Court justices. And the 11th guy who dissented, he didn't have any problem with what they were doing. And he apparently didn't think that they needed a basis in law to do what they did, but he had a technical issue with it. So it's really 11 out of 11 who think that the Supreme Court has the power to fire government ministers in duly constituted lawful governments that were duly approved by the Knesset. So there's no way that the government can back down. And basically then you have not only the European Union that's trying to coerce the universities into all getting involved with bringing down the government, you also have really, I would say, important people in the American Jewish community, like Alan Dershowitz, who was on this program about a month ago debating the issue with Professor Avi Bell, and he's constantly praising the judicial system here in Israel, even though now on a daily basis you see that these people are acting like pyromaniacs, throwing lit matches into a pool of kerosene and trying to light this country on fire. And you have Abe Foxman, the former head of the ADL, who's considered this elder statesman of American Jewry, who said that, if Israel goes forward with the judicial reforms, that he's not going to support Israel anymore. What are you talking about? Are you guys serious? You guys, if you have any influence here at all to bring to bear, then you have to talk to your friends in the judicial system here in Israel and tell them to stand down, because it looks like they are so unwilling to listen to any criticism of anything that they've done and take any limits on the power that they've seized illegally from the people of Israel and by taking away the power of our elected representatives, that they're willing to set this country on fire. That's where we are headed right now, towards a train wreck, and they're the ones driving the train. They're beloved justices and jurists, right? They have to, Alan Dershowitz, Abe Foxman, whoever else is in that clique, have to start talking to Esther Chayut and her friends and tell them to stand down. Same with Yair Lapid, same with Benny Gantz. There are three people driving the train. The two heads of the political opposition, Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz. And then the third one is Esther Chayut. And one of them, all you need really to put on the brakes is for one of them to hit the switch and to stop the train from moving forward. That's it. They have to stop. They have to say, look, you know what? Israel is more important than this. And by the way, Netanyahu and his people have a point. And one last thing I want to say about this. Justice Minister Yariv Levin disappointed a lot of people on the right with this proposal, which is only supposed to be stage one of his judicial reform, because it's so moderate. And there are so many things here that, don't seem right, including the stipulation that you need a 61-seat majority to overturn Supreme Court decisions. And a lot of people say, well, why do we need permission to overthrow Supreme Court decisions in the first place? They don't have a legal right. They seized one, but there is none in the law that gives them the right to cancel laws. I mean, the British Supreme Court, from what I understand, does not have the right to overturn the laws of the Parliament. Why did he just accept this theft of the power to cancel the laws of the Knesset? But be that as it may, it appears that he negotiated with himself and that he put out a proposal that's supposed to actually be executed, not haggled about. And so now we see all of these supposedly moderate people, right, on the side of the justices, driving this train 200 kilometers an hour into the state of Israel, right? You have all of these supposed moderates offering proposals for compromise. And the proposals that were put forward, for instance, by former Deputy Attorney General Raz Nizri, that came out over the weekend, all they call for is to empty of all substance Yariv Levin's proposal. And really, there's not much place here for negotiation. In fact, I can't find any. So this is another problem. So you can say that the execution or the presentation on the part of the government may be problematic, but be that as it may, what he did was put forward an incredibly moderate proposal for judicial reform in Israel that would put minimal checks and balances on the power of our imperialist judiciary. And whether it's Alan Dershowitz and Abe Foxman and their colleagues in the Jewish federations, in all the other major American Jewish organizations, American Jewish Community, American Jewish Congress, whomever it is, they should be talking to them and stop agreeing with their incitement against democracy in Israel and against the public in Israel that voted for this government on a platform of judicial reform. These are important things that people could do. These are important contributions that these people can make if they really love Israel. It's important. All right? Yariv Levin came out and he said, look, I don't want to destroy the justice system, which is what Esther Chayut incontrollably accused him of doing, along with her guru, Aaron Barak, the former president of the Supreme Court, who enacted the initial judicial revolution in Israel in 1995 without legal basis. At any rate, they're saying that we're trying to destroy, we the people are trying to destroy the judicial system. And Yariv Levin said, no, I'm trying to save it. And you know what? He's right. He's right. And the country as well. Israel only exists as a democracy. The concept that anybody in Israel is anti-democratic is simply to ignore the history of Israel. We have been a democracy under the worst conditions, and we've never stopped being a democracy. The Israeli people don't have an authoritarian bone in their body, and history proves it out. And I want to turn now to my conversation with Naomi Kahn from Regavim to talk about some of the things that are happening, in part because we have a legal system that is so radical that it has blocked successive Israeli governments from taking the kinds of actions that need to be taken in Judea and Samaria, in this case, what we're going to be talking about here, to protect Jewish heritage, but in a larger sense, to fight the European Union's political war against the Jewish state and Jewish history and the Jewish people, and to fight the Palestinian Authority, which is an existential threat to all of these things. So these are the stakes. We're in a train wreck right now. They're driving this car, they're driving the locomotive 200 kilometers an hour into the face of Israel, and they have to stop. They just have to stop. They got to stop. And now, without further ado, let's talk a little bit about the destructions of Jewish heritage, of Jewish antiquities in Judea and Samaria. While we're thinking about other things, the Palestinians, with the support of the international community, are devastating all the Jewish cultural, archaeological heritage sites in Judea and Samaria. In 2020, a group of 3 different organizations led by senior archaeologists did a mapping of the 365 most important Jewish heritage archaeological sites in Judea and Samaria. And they went in, they mapped it all, and what they couldn't go into because they were areas under the Palestinian Authority's control, they surveyed from the air with aerial photographies and with drone photography. And they came back with the devastating finding that 40% of the sites, including I think the 25 most important Jewish archaeological sites in Judea and Samaria, had been devastated, including the 25 most important Jewish cultural sites. And this was 3 years ago, right? That the study came out. In the meantime, the Palestinian Authority was exposed, I think, a week or so ago, that the Palestinian Authority is planning on a major housing project that will utterly destroy Joshua's altar. Joshua's altar, which is the place, in fact, it has been proven to be the actual fact where Joshua gathered the tribes upon crossing the Jordan River 3,250 years ago, and dividing up the tribes and I think forming the army. So they want to build apartment buildings on it, because why not? Before that, they were turning it into a barbecue site. So now they just want to go the whole way and destroy it utterly, and others as well. So I want to talk about what has already happening, what's happening on the ground, what the Palestinian Authority's role in it, and what the international community's role in it today on the show. And I'm lucky to have the Naomi Kahn, the head of the director of the International Division of Regavim, which is an incredibly important organization here in Israel that tries to protect our national lands in the Negev and the Galilee and Judea and Samaria and all over the country. And you guys have been really leading the way and trying to alert everybody to what's happening, the cultural rape of Judea and Samaria by the Palestinian Authority to blot out Jewish history. So without further ado, thanks so much for coming. Welcome to the Carolyn Glick Show.
Thanks for inviting me. Unfortunately, it's a very depressing subject.
Indeed.
But it's one that we have to look at. And every day that goes by, the situation gets worse. We've been tracking this since the foundation of Regavim, which is 17 years. We've been in the courts about this. We've been through the bureaucracy about this. We've been in the international arena as well. And we, unfortunately, not encouraged by the progress or lack of progress that has been made. Every day that goes by, there is further destruction. About 2 weeks ago, an internal European Union document was leaked to the press, right, in which we essentially got official confirmation of what we've been seeing on the ground for years, since approximately 2011. Only 2 short years after the Fayyad plan was launched, the European Union officially declared its support for the unilateral creation of a Palestinian state in all of Judea and Samaria. But in this new document that was leaked, the European Union admits, essentially, spells out its policy for monitoring and trying to impede archaeological excavation and the preservation of archaeological sites throughout Judea and Samaria in order to erase or disconnect the Jewish people from its cultural history, from its connection to Judea and Samaria, and to create a Palestinian narrative where one does not exist.
So before we get into the international thing, first I want to talk about specifically the devastation.
Yes.
So if you wouldn't mind, there are a few sites that are better known than others, and they're being devastated. So for instance, I was mentioning Joshua's altar in my setup for this interview. Can you tell me a little bit about the major sites? I think it's Joshua, they're in Samaria, Joshua's tomb, Joshua's altar, the Hasmonean palaces, Tel Aroma,
Yes.
Sebastia, the capital of ancient Israel.
Yes.
Can we talk a little bit about these sites and what's happened to them?
Absolutely. In some cases, it's even more egregious than others. Some of these sites have been simply looted. They're the victims of criminal neglect in some cases. In other cases, the Palestinian Authority has taken an active role in decimating or really vaporizing these sites altogether. In one of the cases that you mentioned, ancient Shomron, which was the capital of the Israelite kingdom, UNESCO itself helped the Palestinian Authority destroy some of the site and reinvent other parts of the site as a Palestinian heritage site.
So, like, what does that mean?
They paved over. They simply brought steamrollers and paved over ancient water cisterns, parts of the wall of the city, parts of the arena. This is a site that is of incredible international it's a World Heritage site.
Yeah, UNESCO
UNESCO
exists
actually
in order to protect
these sites, and in this case, they've actually helped destroy the site and create a fictitious, insane narrative of some Palestinian history there that it's hard to. It's part of the Palestinian Heritage Trail now, and the state of Israel sat back and allowed this to happen.
When did this happen?
2019.
2019.
We've been making noise about the whole issue for years, and the civil administration.
So is ancient Shomron then destroyed now?
No,
or?
It's a massive, massive site, which parts of it are destroyed, parts of it are now paved over. Parts of it, every time I go there, I see that there are less and less of the columns in the ancient arena that are still standing. They are building on parts of the site. They built a whole Palestinian visitors center on part of the site.
This is Sebastia.
Shomron, yes.
Shomron.
Depending on what you call it.
But
yes,
it's
it is
widely
Sebastia.
known as Sebastia.
Sebastia,
Right.
yes.
And that's where they have like this huge 5-story high flag.
Correct. And the flag is actually standing on part of the ancient city, which the problem is the way the Oslo map was drawn, and in many places you'll see this. A, B, C, all of these divisions create a morass of a web of impossible administration, and the civil administration would rather just give it over than argue about it.
There's another one by my house in Efrat. So Gush Etzion was the pilgrimage route of the Jews to Jerusalem 3 times a year, and they had to build this whole water system to enable 1 million people to be in Jerusalem at once with water. And so you see in all of the communities in Gush Etzion, you see the way that Herod had built this incredible engineering wonder of reservoirs and pipeline, essentially, of water from Judea to Jerusalem. And one of the main, reservoirs that was created was Solomon's Pool, which was inadvertently neglectfully placed under Palestinian control. And we went there every once in a while. They give permission to Jews to go visit the site. And it's just it's a garbage dump aside from everything else. It's just totally devastated by the Palestinian
I'm glad you
Authority.
raised this case, because this case, I think, highlights so many of the problems that come to a head here that have allowed this travesty to actually happen. The ancient water system is a wonder of the ancient world. Right. Solomon's pools are one of our most important heritage sites. It supplied water not only for the pilgrimage, but gave water security to Jerusalem. Jerusalem has historically always had a problem right. securing its water supply. And the ancient water system has been decimated both by official Palestinian Authority work and by insane private pirate type of activity that the civil administration should have stopped years ago. One of our earliest cases, the Beit Fajar quarry, the largest illegal quarry in Israel, grows all the time. We've been in court over and over and over again about this. It's thousands of dunams big already, totally changing the countryside and destroying the ancient water system in its path. We've gone to court, I don't know, at least 3 times, 4 times. It's been going on for years and years. And what you have here is a combination of the civil administration's complete non-enforcement of the law. And it's an environmental catastrophe. It's a historic catastrophe. It's a political catastrophe. And the state of and the court says, there's enforcement priorities. The civil administration is a military body, and therefore we're not going to get involved in enforcement priorities. So we will have to trust the civil administration to do its job when it finds the time to be appropriate. And in the meantime, and this is true in many, many of these archaeological sites, despite numerous court orders that should have frozen the situation on the ground, the civil administration has turned a blind eye while the Palestinian Authority simply waltzes right through all of these orders and continues to build, or builds even at a faster pace in order to simply take over. And then retroactively, the civil administration applies to legalize or to recognize all of this catastrophic construction that goes on. We have it all through the territory. We have also in parts of the water system in eastern Gush Etzion, for example, have been plowed under by European Union funded schools, illegal schools, which are a tactic for the Palestinian Authority takeover. So we have this in Khan Luban, we have in the Shomron, in eastern Gush Etzion, we have a number of schools that were built in order to anchor non-existent communities, build communities, create infrastructure around the school that enables the Palestinian Authority to create new quote-unquote villages, many of them on archaeological sites, including the Herodian, for example, which is a massive World Heritage
They're trying
site.
to undermine the Herodian?
They built a school on the grounds of the Herodian site.
Really?
Yes, and we've been in court about this over and over again. Same thing at Kever Shmuel Hanavi, the tomb of Samuel the prophet in the Binyamin region. They built an illegal school. It has all these signs, European Union support, all the member states as well. These illegal schools decimate archaeological sites and enable the creation of more and more construction, more and more infrastructure work that further and further simply decimates all the archaeological sites on which they are being built.
So we have 2 actors here that I want to focus on, and then I want to move to the civil administration and the government of Israel. But so the first one that I want to talk about is the Palestinian Authority, right? Because they're the ones that are doing this. And, one of the things that I found interesting, about 10 years ago, The Guardian and Al Jazeera published the Palestine Papers, right? Which were sort of it was the same time that all of the American documents were being published by what's it called? Not Wikipedia.
WikiLeaks.
WikiLeaks, right. And so the Palestine Papers had one particular paper that I wrote about in my book, The Israeli Solution, which was pretty astounding in its honesty. It was a frequently asked questions crib sheet. And so the question that they provided an answer to was, why won't we recognize Israel as the Jewish state? And they said, if the answer that the Palestinians provided themselves, which was an internal document of their negotiating department, and it said, if we acknowledge that Israel is a Jewish state, then we're going to have to acknowledge that the Jewish heritage in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria, and then it's going to it's going to lead to a discussion that will require us to acknowledge that the cradle of Jewish civilization is in fact Judea and Samaria, and then obviously what it didn't say was that it will point out that there is no Palestinian heritage in Judea and Samaria. So you have this idea that what we have to do, and it's also in the PLO charter, that is to deny the historical link between the Jewish people and Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem, and we've seen all of the massive assault on the Temple Mount by the Palestinians going back, for 25, 30 years.
It goes back 100 years.
Right, but I know the
in
Palestinian
1929.
Authority,
Yeah.
specifically the Palestinian Authority, their destruction of the Temple Mount since really was established in 1994. And so you see that, how does this play out in terms of both the erasure of Jewish history and as a deliberate policy of the Palestinian Authority, and then the invention of a fake history that they attribute to themselves?
It's a very carefully engineered program that has full European support.
I want to get to the Europeans in a second. Let's just talk about the Palestinians
The Palestinian
first.
Authority identified this issue from day one. As a matter of fact, in the Oslo Accords, although there were either 11 or 13, I apologize, I don't remember which, I believe it was 13 specific sites of Jewish heritage that were placed in Palestinian Authority hands because they're in areas A or B. The Palestinian Authority, at the time the PLO, before the Palestinian Authority was actually constituted, gave its commitment to allow full access, full research, preservation, protection of these sites. Of course, they're the first ones that are decimated. You have ancient synagogues, you have and all sorts of very, very important archaeological sites that are in areas A and B that have been completely wiped off the map.
Like what, for instance?
Joshua's tomb, the ancient synagogue in Eshtamoa, Samoa, they're all over. There's an ancient synagogue in Gaza as well. We're not even talking about that.
Right.
Yes, so they're all those, even the specific ones, and Solomon's Pools, for example, was one of them. And they were the state of Israel and Jewish tourism, Jewish excavation, Jewish inspection of the site was guaranteed in the Oslo Accords. That obviously didn't happen, doesn't happen. We're supposed to have access every once in a while with an army escort. They allow some people into Solomon's Pools these days. It's every few years at this point.
Right, we went a couple years ago.
And it's not happening. They as in almost every other aspect, actually every other aspect of the Oslo Accords, the Palestinian Authority from day one did not respect or uphold any aspect of those commitments, even when it was involved in World Heritage sites. This is a very, very carefully constructed program of destruction. You can see, as a matter of fact, from the example that you brought from the Joshua's altar, the entire area around it, in areas that are under Palestinian control, it's empty. There's no reason for them not to be building in places where they're not going to destroy thousands of years of physical historical record. But they are specifically building on areas that will destroy that historical record. It's worse than ISIS because here the international community is supporting it. And it's something that the state of Israel, I believe under any system of law, is required to at least protest.
Right.
At least protest, and not a word.
Well, I was in the talks about archaeology with the Palestinian Authority when I was on the negotiating team during my military service, and we brought in Amir Drury. I remember it was one of the most dramatic things I was involved in because the representative of the Religious Affairs Ministry had inadvertently given the Palestinians control over Samuel's tomb. And I called up Amir Drury at midnight and I said, look, this happened. You have to fix it, And he drove all night long. He just got in his car. As soon as he got off the phone with me, he drove all night long. He showed up in my office at 6 o'clock in the morning. And he said, when are we meeting? And he sat down and he got control back because we had to and he wrote together with the legal advisor of the Israel Antiquities Authority the archaeology agreement. And like you said, it makes all these stipulations. But in the end, what we saw exactly is that the Palestinian Authority, everything that they were supposed to get, they demanded. And everything that they were supposed to preserve, they did. They completely breached. They've been in material breach of the Oslo Accord since the minute that they were implemented on the ground by Israel, and nothing ever happens. And in a way, you can kind of understand the IDF wanting to avoid a confrontation about this, because they have to worry about terrorism, they have to worry about suicide bombers in Jerusalem, they have to worry about 100 different things.
Absolutely, which is why we believe that the military is not suited for these tasks, and why the civil administration should be relieved of duty from things that it has absolutely, as a military organization,
I mean, the police doesn't, right? I mean, one of the things that it has in the Israel Antiquities Authority law is that they established a special unit of the IAA that's responsible for fighting the theft of archaeological sites. And they have police IDs because the police in Israel are not equipped to understand how to handle the theft of archaeological sites.
But there you have the black hole of Judea and Samaria, in which there is no law. There is no there is nothing. Aside from no enforcement, the only law that is actually enforced there is Jordanian law. Now, I would point out that even under the Jordanian archaeological law, which Israel is required to uphold, even if you consider Israel an occupier or whatever you want to call Israel in Judea and Samaria, it is required to uphold the law and to protect these sites. Jordanian law gives the Israeli government tools to do this. Under Jordanian law, the state of Israel not only is required to protect these sites, it has the right, even if land is proven to be privately owned, it has the right to preserve, to purchase, or to lease, or what's inferred from that, also to simply expropriate land that is that has archaeological finds on it that are being abused. So owning even privately owned land.
Well, in Israel, that's the case.
Correct, but Jordanian law has the same. Unfortunately, it's simply not enforced. So about a year and a half ago, because of this initiative that you mentioned at the outset of the creation of Preserving the Eternal and this massive survey that was carried out, the Israel Antiquities Authority was supposed to be given authority in Judea and Samaria, or certainly under the areas under Israeli control. We're writing off areas A and B more or less, but area C at least, at the very least, to extend Israel's antiquities authorities
into Judea and
Samaria to take responsibility for the sites that are still there. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened yet. It's on paper. It hasn't happened. Other things that are supposed to happen is supposed to be the creation of a very large unit, the largest in the Israeli government, that would combine the Antiquities Authority, what do you call it in English, Moreshet, heritage, right? So and to give actual powers, to give budgets, and to give powers, and to give technical and academic.
Okay, again, you keep getting ahead of me because I'm not done with the bad guys.
Okay, let's go back to the bad guys.
Before we go to the incompetent good guy, let's just go to the bad guys for a second. Okay, so the Palestinians, they set out very systematically to destroy Jewish heritage sites, our archaeological sites in Judea and Samaria. But then they also have this invented history. So can we talk a little bit about their invented history? What are they based? How do they approach the idea of of making up thousands of years of non-existing history?
Well, if you look on Wikipedia, for example, you can look up. They have a very, very large presence of all these historical and ethnic and cultural entries. The New Israel Fund has an army of people who sit and create all of this. So look up, for example, traditional Palestinian weaving or embroidery or whatever. And they create this narrative, meaning they'll take bits of physical, some sort of traditional handicraft from across the entire Middle East, rebrand it as Palestinian, and hey presto, you have some sort of hundreds, thousands of years, tens of thousands of years of some tradition, which is essentially a pan-Arab situation, and then they place it in various spots. This village was a center of the weaving industry in Palestine, ancient Palestine. They just simply make it up. It's really very, very simple to do.
So, like, what organizations funded by the New Israel Fund do this?
Well, you're not allowed to say, you see, the way the rules of Wikipedia means if anything is organized, then they will not accept it. So they pay individuals. It's all very, very quiet and behind the scenes. And you have individuals who are supposedly experts on Palestinian culture who are writing each of these things. The same experts, for example, can take over, and they did this to Regavim. Anyone who goes onto Wikipedia and looks up Regavim, you will see that the entire entry on Regavim, our identity, was taken over by quote-unquote experts and completely changed. And we can't edit it back. You're not allowed to edit your own.
No, I
page,
know
and
they
you're not
did. They
allowed-
had all this false information on my
There
Wikipedia
you
thing,
go.
and
We
and
have
they
had-
said I was not objective, and
Exactly.
therefore
We're not objective, so our identity is not in our hands anymore, and our Wikipedia page is a diatribe against what we do, all full of slurs, slanders, and outright lies. But they have an army of people, people whose full-time job is to sit and raise their level of recognition and credibility as in terms of Wikipedia editors, and they create these narratives. So if you go onto the website of the Palestinian heritage site at Sebastia, you will see an entire narrative, and it changes all the time. It gets bigger, deeper, broader, all kinds of insanity, and you'll see this in pretty much any one of these sites. At the same time, the Palestinian Authority has a very large ministry that has full-time employees this is what their job is. They've also created the Palestinian Nature Trail, which goes all through Area C as well. All sorts of things. They've renamed some of the flora and fauna. So you have new Palestinian names for things that they will certainly never use the real name. Jerusalem pine has now got some Palestinian name. And various birds and all these things. They just create a new narrative and put it up on the internet, and it gains traction. And then they have something to refer to. So they create their own echo chamber, and then they echo it.
And their echo chamber is enormous.
It's enormous, and it's very, very well funded. And many, unfortunately, many important organizations on the international stage are more than willing to accept it. Well, there it is. It's in the public domain. This is fact, because somebody wrote it in Wikipedia, because somebody put up a big sign at Sebastia with the UNESCO emblem, and there was a whole ribbon-cutting ceremony, and there's a visitor center that is funded by European concerns. It therefore becomes fact.
So let me just talk a bit about the European Union, and I also want to get into the Biden administration on this, but the European Union here is doing something that is sort of, by its very nature, annihilationist in terms of Jewish history.
Yes.
I mean, they are funding the erasure of their own history. I mean, it's
Correct.
also Roman history. I mean, it's European,
Judeo-Christian.
it's Judeo-Christian heritage
Yes.
of Judea and Samaria, and of the land of Israel, of Jerusalem as well. And I saw that there are all of these organizations, even now, that are saying that, and I talk about it a little bit in my lead for today's show, but that the European Union is now saying that, first of all, they won't fund any archaeological research by Israelis in Jerusalem or in Judea and Samaria.
It's a very old story. That has always been the case. Not only will they not fund, they will not, most international academic or peer-reviewed journals are controlled by that kind of money. The UNESCO and the very large organizations that are clearly anti-Israel. And so researchers who work in these areas can't publish their work, in which case you're essentially wiped out in academia. You don't publish, you don't exist. So all of these things are
So is that
very
the starting
careful.
point that you would take, that with the excavations themselves, or where would you even start Europe's journey to annihilate the record of the Judeo-Christian heritage of the land of Israel? What would be a good starting point for this, for people to just sort of delve into what is in fact now the case very openly, especially with the publication of this internal EU document?
I would say I can send you links. There are enormous numbers of very renowned Israeli archaeologists whose work has never been published outside of Israel for this very reason, and it's always rejected. When you look, for example, at even popular platforms, Biblical Archaeology Review and other places, they will show finds or excavations, for example, at the Hasmonean palaces and the fortresses. They'll show a shot of it, but they won't take a wider angle view to show all the massive Palestinian Authority housing projects that are happening right on the site. It's simply blocked out. So the state of Israel needs to speak.
I know you keep talking about Israel, but I need you to talk to me about
The
European Union.
The European Union is funding all of this. The European Union funds the Palestinian Authority, sends them engineers, sends them support staff, and if you look on the internet, you will see it's called spatial plans for Palestinian communities in Area C. And they send experts and help plan the entire state of Palestine in all of Judea and Samaria, covering all of Area C. And they fund it, and they send, and you can go out any day of the week and you will see UN and EU experts and equipment and support staff, engineers, surveyors, all of these things. They're all out in the field helping to create the state of Palestine on Area C, including Area C, Areas A, B, and C, but all of their resources are poured into Area C because A and B they take as already.
They've already pocketed
it's a done
them.
deal,
right?
So Area C is really the focus of all of it, and their massive, massive investment in infrastructure, in construction, in Area C is simply to take over, and that will include rebranding or reinterpreting archaeological sites, but it's much more convenient to simply plow them over. And they help the Palestinian Authority do this by funding massively. If you look on their spatial plans for development of Palestinian communities in Area C, you will see that they are well aware. They list in each area plan how much of it is taken up by archaeological finds, how much of it is taken up by existing Jewish communities, how much of it is taken up by roads, how much of it is in nature reserves, how much of it is in IDF training zones, how much of it has Israeli army bases. And they don't care. They simply plan right over it and fund the Palestinian Authority's gradual.
How much money are we talking
takeover.
about?
Billions, tens of billions.
And how much do you think they've already spent?
Somebody did a study. It's very, very hard to track all of it because it comes through in so many different ways. But
can you give me two ways that it comes through?
It comes also through certain member state embassies that they have discretionary funds for their embassy here in Israel, and those fund all sorts of things. It comes, almost all of it, as humanitarian aid, nutritional aid, support for threatened communities, comes as education, support for schools. They simply create these schools, support for indigenous farmers. That means they create massive water systems, steal Israeli water, create water systems in order to enable, so that they can enable the creation of villages, quote unquote, because they need a water source. So all of these things come from different, let's call it budgetary lines. We're talking billions of dollars, billions of euros every year, tens of billions. We can't even calculate how much has come through the European Union and individual member states, massive investment by church organizations that are funded by European governments. So that comes through that way as well, comes through, for example, even the British Embassy. They have, the British Embassy in Tel Aviv has its own fund with millions of pounds in there every year that goes to various Palestinian Authority projects. You have the Canadians, for example, all the countries that have representative offices in Ramallah. That's a completely different budgetary line, and there they have all of their professionals, support staff to help the Palestinian Authority create a government, and that means funding all of these kinds of quiet
Incidentally
takeovers.
and parenthetically, I think you guys put out, I know I talked about it on Channel 14 like 2 months ago or something, that there were Canadian military forces that were deploying around Judea and Samaria, and there were photos of
Yes.
these Canadian officers
Yes.
interfering with IDF military operations.
It's even more bizarre than that. There's something that is administered by the U.S. Embassy's USSC, the Security Coordinator Council. This was created during the Clinton administration to monitor the roadmap. It's called Project Proteus. Project Proteus is...
But the roadmap is in 2003. It's with the Bush administration, and Condoleezza Rice massively expanded the security coordinator.
And it just kept on going. Right.
Right.
So Rice is gone.
And all
Bush
of
is gone,
right.
Clinton's gone, and we're still stuck with this
Obama,
project here. That's here. Obama's whatever. The whole thing is still here. What it is representatives of the armed forces of 8 governments. That includes Turkey. That includes Japan. These are uniformed officers, and they were sent to the region to help build capacity for the Palestinian police, meaning train them, etc., etc. Why are they still here? Probably because the state of Israel wants them here as responsible adults looking over the shoulder of the Palestinian police in places where Israel can't go, like Gaza, like Ramallah, like Jericho. But all of a sudden, we began to see these Canadian officers, armed, uniformed Canadian officers, brigadier generals, whatever, roaming around Area C, visiting illegal construction sites, offering support to Palestinians whose illegal structures have been demolished by the civil administration on those rare occasions that happens, etc., etc. And we became incensed. We sent off letters not only to our foreign ministry and to our ambassador in Canada, but also to the Canadians themselves, to the Canadian foreign minister and to the Canadian embassy here. And
Did you ever get any responses to those?
we never
letters?
got any responses. However, and this is unconfirmed between us
And our audience.
and our audience, which I'm still trying to get confirmation about, the Americans got very upset because the Canadians were overstepping the mandate, and they aren't supposed to be in Area C at all. If they're here to create capacity and work with the Palestinian police, they should be in Areas A and B, and not anywhere in Area C, because there's no Palestinian police presence in Area C.
Okay,
So-
now I want to move. I'm going to interrupt you
Yes.
because I want to try to. We can't talk for 3 hours, although we could talk
We
for
could.
5.
Yes.
But first of all, before we go to Israel, we're going to end with Israel and our Keystone Cops administration of all of this thing. But first, what set me off on this whole thing, I have to do something on the archaeology, is that 2 weeks ago, the U.S., Michael Steinhardt, who's a Jewish philanthropist, I don't know, he got embroiled in some tax evasion investigation. Not clear what it was, but the settlement that he reached with the federal government was that he had to give them $30 million worth of antiquities that he had in his collection. And they decided that one of them was an artifact from the 2,700-year-old artifact from the South Hebron Hills, which is around the time of the Assyrian occupation of ancient Israel. And they decided to give this to the Palestinian Authority, and
Massive ceremony, the whole
in
thing.
Bethlehem. They had a huge ceremony in Bethlehem where they're giving it, and they called it your paternal heritage.
Yes.
And I thought, whose father? What are you talking about? What heritage? So the U.S. government is now actively involved in cultivating this fake history
Correct.
of the land of Israel.
Correct.
So
And where is our government?
Well, one more second. First, U.S. government.
Yes.
What is going on there? What is the U.S. involvement in this?
The U.S. involvement is appalling.
What is it? Appalling is an adjective. But what are the details? What do you know?
There is no precedent for this sort of behavior. Palestine does not exist under international law. The state of Palestine does not exist.
The U.S. doesn't recognize
The
Palestine.
U.S. does not recognize Palestine, and it is therefore actually probably against the law for the American government to quote unquote repatriate to a non-existent sovereign artifacts that rightly belong to the state of Israel.
And aren't even under their security control or their control of the
Correct.
Palestinian Authority.
Correct.
And this at a time when the Palestinians are systematically destroying the historical record of
Correct.
Jewish settlement in the South Hebron Hills, which is sort of focused on the ancient Jewish city of Susia, right?
Susia is an issue. There are so many sites that are being decimated in the eastern Gush Etzion, from everything in the South Hebron area all the way up through Gush Etzion and coming up to Jerusalem.
No, we drove to Eilat over Hanukkah, and we drove through the whole Hebron and South Hebron Hill areas, and it was depressing.
It's depressing. It's depressing.
I mean, they
It
had
is.
beautiful agriculture, and you knew that it was getting the top funding, and it was all over the ruins of Jewish civilization.
The ruins of Jewish civilization are being literally plowed under. We had the largest Second Temple era burial caves, which were the Palestinian Authority issued permits for local farming. They came
Where
with
is this?
bulldozers outside Jericho, in Area C, bulldozed the entire thing, stole the sarcophagi, dumped all the bones.
Okay, Naomi, now's your chance. Let's talk about Israel, the Keystone Cop.
The Keystone Cop. It's worse than the Keystone Cop because
Right.
the Keystone Cops actually they
At least try
make,
to do
they
something.
make some move as if they're going to do something. Here, the civil administration, in so many cases, has actually worked at cross purposes to the Jewish national interest and to world history by not only encouraging, not only turning a blind eye, but actually encouraging the decimation of these sites.
Give me an example.
So if we run to the civil administration, we say they're starting to build something illegal. This is an archaeological polygon. This has been a declared archaeological site since the British Mandate, or some of them even
Ottoman
before.
Empire.
Right? This is an archaeological site. It is a recognized archaeological site. They are starting to build, or an individual is taking over an archaeological ruin and turning it into his own private home. This has happened all over the place. We've been in court with things like this over and over and over again. So what does the civil administration do? The civil administration says, well, we need to figure out how we're going to enforce the Jordanian law that is in force here. So we need a delay. So we've had cases where they've asked 20 times, 20 times for delays.
In what?
In enforcement. We go to court. The Supreme Court says, okay, what are you doing about it? I say, well, we have to figure out how exactly we're going to enforce the law. At the same time, they encourage the builders of these illegal structures to apply for building permits in an archaeological site. And then what do? The civil administration created, without any authority to do so, an internal procedure that is actually a violation of the law. They say, okay, as long as something is in the process of requesting or being considered for a permit, we don't enforce the law. So the Palestinian Authority...
Well, at least when it's not Jews doing the permit request.
So the Palestinian Authority comes in full blast, knowing that it has this umbrella of protection because the civil administration has declared that this is its policy. It will not enforce the law while there are proceedings underway. So they continue to build, they continue to destroy and the civil administration are the ones who tell them, okay, so if that is rejected time and time again.
So
and
the government passed this decision in 2019 to move control over antiquities in Judea and Samaria from the staff officer in the civil administration for archaeology to the Israel Antiquities Authority. Correct. And that hasn't happened.
Hasn't happened.
If it happens, what would it mean and how would it work?
This whole unit has now been created. It's a whole new, essentially a government authority that combines the Israel Antiquities Authority, which is essentially, it's not an enforcement body, it's an academic, scientific body, which will carry out the rescue excavations, actual excavations, documentation and protection of these sites. But then you have the heritage ministry, the Ministry of Heritage, which has the budgets to do these things, and the enforcement powers, etc. So it would create an umbrella that could actually make a dent in what's left in Area C. Obviously nothing in Areas A and B. But at least let's start with something. Some sort of move towards protecting the physical record of our ancient history here and our connection to the land. It's no coincidence that the European Union is intent on blocking in any way that it can, aside from assisting the Palestinian Authority, it wants to block Israeli archaeology and excavation.
Yeah, look what they're doing with the City of David. I mean, the City of David is one of the, maybe, I don't know, the only one, you can tell me, major national heritage sites that is controlled by a private entity, right? The Ir David Foundation, and it has to be, because if it hadn't been, then it would have been destroyed. And so the left, through the different New Israel Fund funded organizations, have been waging lawfare against the Ir David Foundation to try to criminalize it, delegitimize it, demonize it, and seize its power. And the only reason that we have the City of David being excavated is because they managed, through a miracle, to take control of the site.
Correct. I think that the recent move by the American government in returning, quote unquote, this artifact speaks directly to this same issue. When we have a black hole, we have to step in as private organizations, which is why Regavim as a nonprofit, and Preserving the Eternal, which was spun off also as a nonprofit, and in some cases the Shiloh Forum, which gets very, very involved in all of these issues. The government is not there. So the only way to actually save this is to create private entities. We don't want to replace the government. We want the government to do its job. But when the government isn't doing its job, then we need things like Ir David. We need things like Ateret Kohanim. We need things like all of these bodies together. Now, the Jerusalem municipality in a lot of places here should be filling in all of this. Ministry of Justice in a lot of places. The whole Sheikh Jarrah travesty that came into all of this.
No, we're going a fire field, but I mean,
yes.
I think suffice to say that what you're saying is that the destruction of Jewish antiquities in Judea and Samaria and in Jerusalem is part of a much larger problem. And I would say, and you know, when we're filling this out, let's try to fill the holes in what I'm saying. I would say that the problem is threefold. You have the Palestinian Authority that is deliberately the destruction of the Jewish historical record in the land of Israel as part of their effort to deny the right to exist of the Jewish state and the existence of the Jewish people in our history, as set out in this frequently asked question that they were asked, and why don't they accept that Israel's a Jewish state? And second, Europe is continuing their, I mean, I think Turya Tannenbaum was the first one who said it in Catch the Jew, that what we're seeing here is a proxy war. The Palestinians are a European proxy, that the Europeans themselves are trying to annihilate the Jewish state. Correct. They're continuing their war on the Jews through different means here in the land of Israel, and the Palestinians are their agents.
Well, when you asked me earlier, how is it, how does the Palestinian Authority create this narrative? When you have such a willing recipient on the other end of the phone line as the European community, it's so easy. They'll make something up, tell it to me, and I'll run with it.
And I'll give you $1 million to push
for sure.
a pseudo-academic journal.
I'll give you $1 million to first create the lie, and then I'll give you another $1 million to help propagate the lie, and then we'll, on our end, make sure that it is accepted as truth.
And then Israel is condemned for questioning it.
Correct.
So that's the two bad guys in this. And then the good guy in this doesn't actually know what it wants to do. And so now, hopefully we have, this government is 2 weeks old, and right now I truly believe that everything is contingent on legal reform and also on figuring out how to work the civil administration piece. Bezalel Smotrich came in with this, finance minister, with this requirement that he be in control of the civil administration. It's not working out so well on the ground right now. I kind of think that this is less important than legal reform, but I mean, something has to be done with the civil administration because they're acting as a hostile element inside of the Israeli military right now.
I would say yes, judicial reform is, nothing else can move without it.
Right.
But on the other hand, a lot of the problems that we've discussed today can be solved if the coalition agreements are actually upheld. And so far they have not been.
2 weeks.
Yeah, I'm willing to give them time, but everything has come to a head, for example, at the Joshua's altar.
Right. What can be done there?
Case.
If we were to take this as a test case and then use it as a basis for continued action, what would be your suggestion to Prime Minister Netanyahu, Defense Minister Gallant, and Education Minister? I mean, all of the relevant ministers, and of course Smotrich.
Exactly
what would you suggest that they do right now?
The powers that that Netanyahu guaranteed in the coalition agreements have to actually be transferred into the hands that they were promised. So,
but what would they do?
What would they do is, first of all, they would actually convene this overarching umbrella organization that would combine the Israel Antiquities Authority with the Heritage Ministry and give actual powers to protect and police the site. The civil administration at the moment is blocking all access to Jews to this site, which is a travesty. If Jews were actually physically allowed to be there, to visit, to tour. There was a Jewish farm on that hill that was removed. A Jewish presence there would help to protect the site, and this is a proven fact. There's no, so Jewish presence has to be not only allowed but encouraged, and I think that the same model can be used in other places where
so that you have continuous guarding of the
continuous presence, guarding, and that comes with a lot of other things. That would mean that there would be security. That would mean that there would be surveillance. That would mean that there would be at least a military presence to protect the Jewish community, because there's going to be pushback. We know very well the Arabs aren't going to welcome a Jewish presence there with open arms. But this has been going on for far too long, where the civil administration simply, in order to maintain quiet, which is what a military organization, what a military branch does, it's much easier to keep the Jews off and to allow the Arabs to do whatever they want rather than the other way around.
It's to me like we got to get some cojones.
Yeah, well, that's always been the problem, hasn't it?
It has.
Israel has rights. These rights should be supported. Certainly in these cases of archaeological sites that are being decimated, they should be supported by every forward-thinking country in the world. And even if they are not, Israel has the duty, both to the Jewish people and to world history, to protect these sites, no matter what it takes.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's what we have the country for.
Correct.
All right. Well, listen, Naomi Kahn from Regavim, thank you very much for joining me on this show. And guys, look, there's a lot of work we have to do here. There's no question about it. But, with people like you and Regavim, and hopefully with this government, we're going to be able to protect these sites and not allow the Europeans and the Palestinian Authority to blot out 3,500 years of Jewish history in the land of Israel. So thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you. And we'll see you guys next week.